They found him on the courthouse steps. My son, my firstborn, sitting with his 5-year-old boy pressed against his side, a single duffel bag at his feet, and nothing else. No car, no wallet. No explanation that made any sense to anyone who didn't know what kind of people his wife's family truly were. I was 3 blocks away when my phone rang. My driver answered through the dashboard speaker. My son's voice came through, and I heard him try to keep it steady, try to sound like he was managing. I knew from the first syllable that he was not managing at all. "Pull over," I told my driver. He already had. I was out of the car before the engine finished idling. My son sat with his shoulders curved forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground the way a man stares when he doesn't know where else to look. My grandson sat tucked against his father's side, still wearing the clothes from school that morning, holding a small plastic toy truck in both hands, the kind of thing you grab when someone rushes you out the door, when there's no time to think. My heels on the courthouse steps, my son looked up. His eyes were red around the edges. He hadn't been crying recently. He'd been crying for hours and then stopped because he had a child to hold together. "Mom," he said, just that word. I didn't rush. I walked to them the way I've walked into every boardroom, every negotiation, every room where someone expected me to falter. Steady, deliberate, in complete control. But inside, something cracked clean. "Tell me what happened," I said. My voice was calm, probably too calm. His breath hitched. His father-in-law had called him into the main office at 7 that morning. Said there were financial discrepancies in the accounts. Said the auditors had traced $183,000 in unauthorized transfers directly to my son's login credentials. Said he had no choice. My son tried to explain. He was walked out by security before he could finish a sentence. He drove home. The locks had been changed. His wife stood in the doorway and spoke to him through the glass. "It was over," she said. She had already retained a family attorney. He would be hearing from them regarding a custody arrangement. He should leave before she involved the police. He stood there until he understood she meant every word. Then he drove to his son's school, signed him out early, told him they were going on an adventure, and drove in circles for 40 minutes because he had nowhere to go. "Her father told me once," my son said quietly, "that our family background wasn't the right kind of foundation for what they were trying to build." He paused. I thought he was talking about business philosophy. I don't think that's what he meant. My grandson looked up at me with wide brown eyes. "Grandma," he said, "are we going to your house?" I crouched down, smoothed a curl away from his forehead. "We are, sweetheart," I said, "right now." Then I stood. I looked at my son. "Get in the car." "Mom, I don't even know." "Get in the car." He stood. My driver had the back door open. My grandson climbed in first, pressed himself against the window, held his truck with both hands. My son sat beside him, and my grandson leaned into him without being asked. The drive to my home on Isle of Hope takes 22 minutes. My grandson fell asleep before we reached the bridge. My son stared out the window and said nothing, which was exactly right. I didn't need him to speak yet. I needed him to be still. What my son's father-in-law believed, what both of them believed, was that Pemberton Culinary Group was his empire. He had built the brand, he told people. He had assembled the team, secured the contracts, developed the event space and the commercial kitchen on Drayton Street, and the production facility out on the South Side. He said this at every luncheon, every Chamber of Commerce gathering, every charity table where men like him are invited to sit and be admired. He was wrong about all of it. I had held the controlling interest in Pemberton Culinary Group since 2018, structured beneath 2 holding companies and a family trust I had established in Delaware. Every building the company occupied was leased from a property entity I controlled. The licensing agreements, the federal permits, the insurance bonds, All of it flowed through structures that bore my name, 3 layers deep. I had allowed my son's father-in-law to play the role of owner because I wanted to watch. I had learned in 30 years of building companies that the truest test of a person's character is what they do when they believe no one of real consequence is looking. My son didn't know any of this. I had kept it that way deliberately. He needed to believe he had earned his position as culinary director through his own talent. Because he had. But I also needed someone I trusted inside those walls. When I offered him the job, I understood exactly what I was doing. He did not. Now I understood exactly what they had done. Inside the house, I showed them to the guest wing. My son ran a bath for my grandson. By the time the water shut off, my grandson was half asleep in the back bedroom, still holding that small plastic truck in one hand. I waited until I heard my son settle. Then I walked downstairs, closed the door of my study, and made 3 calls. My attorney, my forensic accountant, a woman I had used twice in 30 years, who charged accordingly and was worth twice what she charged, and the private investigator I had known since he worked cases for my late husband's firm more than 2 decades ago. Each of them answered immediately. I told them what I needed: a full financial audit of every transaction in Pemberton Culinary Group going back 36 months. Login records, IP addresses, transfer authorizations, everything. I wanted to know who had actually moved that money and from what device. I wanted the lease documents confirmed and the title records ready. And I needed to know whether my daughter-in-law had ever done anything like this before. I gave each of them 72 hours. My investigator came back in 54. The police report arrived the following morning. My son's father-in-law had filed it against my son the same evening they had him escorted out, before my son had even figured out where he was going to sleep that night. Grand theft by employee. The amount: $183,400. The allegation: systematic embezzlement over 14 months. They expected that report to close every door in front of him. My daughter-in-law called him that afternoon. He recorded it, as my attorney had advised. She was smooth on the phone, controlled. The kind of calm that doesn't come naturally, the kind a person practices. She said she was open to a resolution. Her father didn't want to destroy anyone, she said. If my son would sign a statement accepting responsibility for the financial discrepancies, the custody filing could be quietly withdrawn and the police report reconsidered. She said my grandson needed a real home, not a grandmother's guest room. She said my involvement in the situation was making everything more complicated than it needed to be. Then she said that women like me, women who spend their lives building things and assume that ownership protects them, eventually discover how little it matters when it truly counts. My son let the silence sit. She stretched it too long, then filled it herself. 24 hours, she said. After that, we proceed. My attorney called me 17 minutes after I listened to the recording. Extortion, she said, custodial coercion, financial intimidation, all recorded, 3rd documented instance. What did the accountant find? 41 transfers over 14 months, all executed between 11 at night and 2 in the morning, all from your son's login credentials. But the IP addresses don't match any device registered to him. They trace to a tablet registered to your daughter-in-law's personal account. I was standing at the window of my study. The marsh below the house was flat silver in the early morning. She framed him, I said. Methodically, my attorney said, every transaction timed to avoid detection. This was planned well in advance. My investigator's findings arrived the following evening in a gray folder. He walked me through it in the study after dinner, while my son was upstairs putting my grandson to bed. Before my son, there had been someone else, a man from Augusta, Georgia, a general contractor. He and my daughter-in-law had lived together for nearly 2 years. In that time, she had gradually taken over management of his business accounts. offering to handle the bookkeeping, the vendor payments, the operating lines. When the relationship ended, when she ended it, his company carried $97,000 in debt it had not started with, and his personal credit had been gutted. He had filed a police report. She had relocated before the investigation reached her. The case went cold. He was still in Augusta, still rebuilding. My investigator had spoken with him at length. He had said she had a script. Every apology, every kind word, every moment of understanding. I thought she was the most patient person I had ever met. I didn't understand until it was over that she had been reading from a page the entire time. He was willing to speak publicly. He had been waiting, my investigator told me, for someone to ask. I had to tell my son. We sat on the back porch the next morning, watching the light come up over the water. My grandson was inside with my housekeeper, eating breakfast, narrating each bite to himself in a running commentary. I told my son everything, the financial structure of Pemberton, the transfers, the device, and then I told him about the man from Augusta. My son sat very still, not the stillness of peace, the stillness of something inside a person finishing the work of reorganizing itself. She chose me because she thought I was connected to something she could reach, he said finally. She chose you because she didn't know what I actually controlled, I said. She thought she understood the board. She had no idea how many pieces she couldn't see. He looked at the water for a long time. I loved her, he said, not as accusation, just as fact. I know, I said. I thought I knew who she was. She spent years making sure you would think exactly that. That is not a failure of your judgment. That is what a practiced predator does. They make trust feel like clarity. He was quiet. What happens now? He asked. I watched my grandson through the glass door, running a truck along the edge of the breakfast table, making engine sounds under his breath. Now we protect him, I said, and we make sure she never does this to anyone else. I called the banker who managed Pemberton's credit facilities that morning. We had done business for nearly 20 years. He understood, without being told, that a call at 7:15 was not routine. I instructed him to freeze every credit line associated with Pemberton Culinary Group. Internal security review, effective immediately, no timeline for resolution provided. He was quiet for a moment. That'll stop their payroll cycle on Friday, he said. Yes, I said. Another pause. It'll be done within the hour, he said. I also directed my attorney to initiate lease termination on all 3 Pemberton properties. The agreements each contained a material breach provision, forging financial records, filing a false police report against a company employee, conspiring to frame that employee for crimes committed by a family member. This was not a gray area. By noon, Pemberton Culinary Group could not access $1 of operating credit. By 3 that afternoon, vendor calls were already coming in. My investigator had a camera in the main office, legally installed 6 months prior, during a routine my daughter-in-law's father had himself signed off on, without knowing who had ordered it. Through the feed, I watched my son's father-in-law pick up the phone, set it down, pick it up again. His face had gone the color of old concrete. My daughter-in-law called my son again at 4:30, recorded as before. She was not controlled this time. The performance had cracked through. She said she knew I was behind all of it. She said if I did not stop, she would take my grandson to her sister's home out of state, and the courts would not be able to move fast enough to stop her. My attorney, who was sitting beside me, set her pen down very deliberately. That's a federal custodial interference threat, she said. 4 recordings now, 4 documented instances. Is that sufficient? I asked. She looked at me steadily. It's been sufficient since the second one, she said. Now it's enough to ensure there are no complications whatsoever. The man from Augusta drove down 2 days later. He and my son sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours that evening, while I made tea and stayed mostly quiet. I watched them compare notes. I watched my son's face when he realized that the phrases this man described, the exact wording, the exact gestures, the same careful sequence of warmth, followed by isolation, followed by quiet control, were the same phrases, the same gestures, the same sequence he had lived through. She told me my family didn't really understand what we had together, the man from Augusta said. My son set down his cup. She said that to me in the first year, he said. She said I was too emotional, too sensitive. She told me that for 2 years. She said her father had a legacy to protect, that not everyone was built for it. My son looked at his hands. I leaned forward. You are not alone in this, I said to both of them. Neither of you did anything wrong except trust someone who had made a careful study of being trusted. That is not weakness. That is what makes a person human. The man from Augusta pressed both hands to his face for a moment, then lowered them. What do you need from me? He asked. Your testimony, I said, your documentation, your willingness to stand in a room and say clearly what happened to you. He didn't hesitate. I've been waiting to say it somewhere, that it would actually matter, he said. The Coastal Georgia Business Leaders Luncheon was held that Friday at a hotel downtown. My son's father-in-law had been named Community Builder of the Year for the quarter. The invitation had sat on my desk for 3 weeks. I had RSVP'd for 2. My son stayed home with my grandson. My grandson asked if it was a party. I said yes. He said he wanted to come. I told him it was a very boring party, just for adults, and that I would bring him something good from the dessert table. He thought about this and decided it was acceptable, and went back to his trucks. The ballroom was all warm light and white linen, and 300 people who believed they knew who ran this city. My son's father-in-law stood at the podium near the front, holding a glass award engraved with his name, talking about integrity, about legacy, about the principles that had guided him for 40 years. I sat near the back with the man from Augusta and my attorney. We did not applaud. At the moment, I had arranged with the technician I had retained as the venue's audiovisual consultant, a position the hotel staff believed was a standard booking. I sent a single text. The room lights shifted, almost imperceptibly. The projection screen behind the podium flickered once. Then it cleared. White text on black. The truth about the man at this podium. 300 people went quiet in stages, the way a crowd does when it cannot quite believe what it is reading. The screen filled with the forensic accountant's transfer analysis. 41 transactions, timestamps, IP addresses, device registration records, each line annotated, each discrepancy flagged in red. Beside it, my son's personnel file, clean and unaltered, alongside the notation that every flagged transaction had been authorized from a device that had never been registered to him. My son's father-in-law turned around. His expression in that moment confirmed what I had already suspected. He had known exactly what his daughter was doing. The recording played through the room speakers. My daughter-in-law's voice clear and unmistakable. If your mother doesn't stop, I'll take him out of state, and the courts won't catch up in time. Someone in the front row stood, a reporter. Cameras appeared at several tables. The screen changed. The lease agreements for all 3 Pemberton properties, owner of record, my holding company. At the bottom of each document in plain black text, terminated for material breach. And beneath that, the title records for every building the company had ever operated from. All mine. My son's father-in-law gripped the podium with both hands. He understood, in that moment, that the empire he believed he had built had been built entirely on land and in buildings he had never owned. That every piece of infrastructure, their commercial kitchen, every event space, every production facility, had belonged to someone else the entire time. To me, I stood. The man from Augusta stood beside me. 300 people turned toward the back of the room. I did not raise my voice. The man at this podium, I said, filed a false police report against my son to conceal his daughter's financial crimes. She transferred $183,000 from a company she does not own, using credentials that belong to my son, and then she and her father arranged to have him fired, locked out of his own home, and separated from his child. I gestured to the man beside me. This man, before my son, was her previous target. The same methods, the same manufactured evidence, the same calculated destruction of someone who trusted her. The room was completely still. Predators, I said, count on silence, on the assumption that the people they have hurt are too ashamed or too disoriented to speak clearly. We are neither. The ballroom doors opened behind us. 2 detectives and an investigator from the Savannah Police Department walked through the crowd. My attorney had coordinated with them over the preceding 48 hours. They moved without rushing, the way people move when everything is already settled and they are simply completing a formality. My son's father-in-law did not move. I believe he understood finally that there was nowhere left to go. My daughter-in-law was arrested at her family home 40 minutes later. I was not there for that. I did not need to be. The trial ran the better part of 3 months. These things always take longer than the telling makes them sound. My daughter-in-law was convicted on charges of financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, and making a criminal threat in a custody matter. Her father was convicted as a co-conspirator. The man from Augusta testified on the second day and spoke for 2 hours, steadily and without hesitation. My son testified. The forensic accountants spent 3 days on the stand. The jury deliberated for less than a day. At sentencing, the judge read the findings without ceremony. What matters is not the numbers, but the simple fact that neither of them can reach anyone they want to hurt. Not anymore. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, my son stopped walking. He stood still with his hands in his pockets and looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "You don't thank family for this," I told him. He looked at me for a long moment. He had his father's eyes and his own jaw, set the way it always sets when he is working not to show something. "What happens to Pemberton?" he asked. "That depends on whether you want it," I said. He thought about this quietly. "I want to rebuild it," he said. "Clean, legitimate books, a real foundation, something my son can walk into someday and not have it cost him anything." That, I thought, is exactly the right answer. The man from Augusta opened a small business mentoring center in his city the following spring, using part of a settlement to fund the first year of operations. I made a contribution to the operating costs and attended the opening. He shook my hand at the door and said that, for the first time in a long while, he felt like himself again. I understood that completely. My grandson asked me once, on an ordinary afternoon, with no particular significance attached to it, why his mother was not coming back. He was 5. He deserved an honest answer in a language a 5-year-old can actually hold. I told him that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people who trusted them. And when that happens, other people who love those people have to step in and make sure everyone is safe. He thought about this carefully, the way he thinks about most things. "Like when I was on the courthouse steps," he said. "Exactly like that," I said. He looked at the truck in his hand. Then he looked at me. "Are we safe now?" I took his hand in both of mine. "We are safe now," I said, "and you are never going to sit on those steps again." He seemed fully satisfied with that. He stood up and walked to the window to look at the boats moving on the water. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, thinking about what it costs to build something, a company, a life, a family that holds together when the pressure finally comes, and what it truly means to protect it. Not with noise, not with anger or any of the things people expect from a woman who has been pushed to her limit, but with the quiet, deliberate certainty of someone who has spent 30 years knowing exactly what she owns, and exactly what she owns, and exactly what she will not surrender. My son was downstairs on a call with a contractor, talking through plans for the new kitchen space. Clean name, clean books, clean beginning. My grandson was counting boats at the window. I had built everything I had from nothing, starting over at 29 with a child and no safety net, and a very clear understanding that no one was coming to rescue us. I had built it brick by brick, contract by contract, decision by careful decision, over decades of mornings when I got up before anyone else and worked until everyone else had gone to sleep. I would not let anything take it. Not then, not now, not ever. Some things, when you have fought long enough to keep them, simply become yours in a way that no document can fully capture and no court can fully convey. My family is one of those things.